ተወዳጅ ክብርት ፕሬዝዳንታችን ፕሬዝዳንት ሳህለወርቅ, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is really a great pleasure for me to be here and to welcome you to the 8th International Policy Conference on the African Child, which will be on the theme Child Hunger in Africa. This is an important event for the African Child Policy Forum. It brings together government officials, child rights activists, experts, academics from within Africa, but also from around the world. It gives me a particular pleasure to be here today for a number of reasons. First, it happens that we have amongst us some of our old members, the first founding trustees of the African Child Policy Forum, like Lala Ben Barka, the former Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission. Lala, you are very much welcome. It was a joy to see you this morning and a very pleasant surprise. We also have another distinguished founding trustee, Ambassador Konjitsina Georgis, who is here with us. And we have also a number of other distinguished guests who showed up suddenly in some cases, and this to our very pleasant surprise. Before I go into the substance of my introduction, it is important that I put this conference in context. Many of you know what the African Child Policy Forum stands for, but there are others who may not know, and therefore let me say a few things about the raison d'etre of this organization, how we happen to come into being. The first and the most important thing is the realization that the state of the African child really leaves much to be desired. Africa is the youngest continent in the world, and in fact in 2050 we're going to see a world where about 2 out of 5 world's children are going to be African. But the condition of the African child leaves much to be desired. And we felt that though there were many organizations working on Africa's children, for example, thousands of grassroots organizations, we felt that it was important that there were African independent organizations that worked on political advocacy on behalf of the African child. This for the following reason. Although a lot of good work is being done on the grassroots level, and although many children are benefiting from the work of many non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, the impact of such work is likely to be infinitesimal compared with the magnitude of the problem. If you really wanted to make a substantive change on the condition of the African child, it is important that you engage in policy issues and that you impact on government policy. And we therefore felt that there was a need for an independent policy advocacy center. There was also another important reason, and that is that if you wanted again to draw attention to the condition of the African child, it is important that we needed to have the issue in front of the political and public agenda. Thirdly, governments are the key duty bearers when it comes to the rights of children. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child put the obligation on the state. And that therefore it was important that we carried out work that impacted on government performance, that monitored government performance, and drew attention to how far governments, African governments, are living up to their obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. The third reason was that, as you would know, the African voice in the discourse on child rights is rather limited. Much of the monitoring, much of the complaints, much of the advocacy work when it comes to rights in general, human rights in particular, is done by Western organizations, Western human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. The African voice is generally missing. And I thought, or we thought rather, that it was important to have African voices engaging in this discourse on human rights. Finally, there is also the fact that much of the conversation and discourse on African developmental problems, social problems, is really characterized by Afro-pessimism. If you looked, for example, at the anthropological or sociological studies concerning Africa, or much of the media coverage concerning Africa, it is really dominated by Afro-pessimism. Even in the case of those global reports that looked at global development, the manner with which African performance is evaluated is not terribly satisfactory. Let's take, for example, the World Development Report or the Human Development Report, or even for that matter, the UNICEF reports. You find that in the Human Development Report, for example, you have these indices which showed Norway at the top and Mozambique at the bottom, or Switzerland at the top and Rwanda at the bottom. In a way, it has no connection at all with the context within which African development is taking place. It becomes, strictly speaking, a statistical exercise where you manipulate statistics, you feed the data, and then you have Norway with a per capita income of such and Mozambique at the bottom. It is not terribly illuminating. It does not connect with the African context. And therefore we felt that it was important that we have our own mechanisms for evaluating performance, that we have our own platform to evaluate performance. And in this case, we found that relating and connecting performance amongst African countries, Kenya vis-à-vis Tanzania, for example, or Ethiopia vis-à-vis Kenya, or the Sudan, or vis-à-vis Ghana, and so on and so forth, that is a far more illuminating way of looking at the African problematic than just having a long list of 200, 300 countries. You have Mozambique on the bottom and Norway at the top. For there is nothing in common between Mozambique and Norway, except that they share coastal states. They are both coastal states. Rwanda, Switzerland, they are landlocked countries. But there's really little or nothing that connects them in the context of their politics, in the context of their developments. And we therefore felt that there was a need for an African institution that did look at the problem, the African problem, within context, and hence the African Child Policy Forum. Now, we do really two things: knowledge building and advocacy. And that we complement with dialogue. And this is what the International Policy Conference about, a forum for dialogue. And therefore, I'm glad that you are here. This is the 8th International Policy Conference. We have had in the past some very sensitive issues like inter-country adoption or child poverty or violence against girls and so on and so forth. And today we are picking up this extremely important problem of child hunger. And so I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that we're going to have this conversation. I'm also glad, in addition to the fact that we have our old friends like Lala Ben Barka, Ambassador Conjisina Georgis, and the others. I'm very glad that we're here today for a special reason. We have with us, I'm really privileged to welcome our President Sahle-Work Zewde, a figure almost certainly destined to play a major historic role in the history of modern democratic Ethiopia. Madam President, I'm not saying this out of protocol reasons or out of courtesy, but most sincerely, deeply touched that you could be with us today, and thank you very much. I'm also pleased that we have a couple of extremely important colleagues and friends. I'm very glad to welcome you, Anne-Brigitte Albrechtsen, the CEO of Plan International. Anne-Brigitte, you may not know that there is a history between the African Child Policy Forum and Plan International, a history which I never cease talking about. It is thanks to the inspired leadership and generosity of Plan International that we were able to start to get the seed money that was needed to start this organization. With the little amount of money you gave us, Anne-Brigitte, we have today built this kind of a vibrant Pan-African Pan-African regional organization, an independent center of research and advocacy. Thank you so very much, and I'm glad you're here. Patrick Kanagasingham, who is the CEO of Christian Children's Fund of Canada, is another very, very good friend. Patrick received me a couple of months ago in Toronto, and then he took me to Ottawa. And honestly, I don't know what he did with the members of parliament, but there I was, almost treated like the president of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. And thank you very much, Patrick, for all that you have done to promote ACPF in Canada and North America. As for Madam El Fadil, Madam Commissioner, you have always been forthcoming. You have always been open to us, and you have always offered us, frankly and candidly, your counsel and advice. You may not know, Madam Commissioner, that one of the founding trustees of this organization was your predecessor, Advocate Biens Gawanas. You know, she was one of the founding members of this thing. Biens Gawanas, now the Undersecretary General of the United Nations in New York, was a committed advocate of women's rights and child rights in Africa. She was a pillar of our organization. And since then, we have had a very close relationship with the African Union. And thanks to your support, the support of your colleagues, as well as the support of the chairs of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, we are, I can say, a privileged member and partner of the African Union community, and thank you for that. I do not think that we would have come as far as we have were it not for the inspired leadership and guidance we got from our International Board of Trustees. The typical African I am, I tend to be sentimental about acts and expressions of generosity. And I cannot pass this opportunity without remembering the very first chair of the International Board of Trustees, Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim, the distinguished African statesman and Secretary General of the African Union. Dr. Salim was then succeeded by President Chissano of Mozambique, a man of enormous humility and enormous wisdom. And we're very lucky that President Chissano was succeeded by none other than this larger-than-life figure, Graça Machel, who has been... Graça Machel is someone of immeasurable qualities, indefatigable, intellectually vigorous, and extremely conscientious, in spite of the fact that she's extraordinarily busy, and she's incredibly busy, I would say, from what I have seen. She has always been there for us to promote ACPF and to promote the rights and welfare of the African child. And she has been very much of a recognizable presence in the news media, in the newspaper media, where she has been authoring opinion pieces on the condition of the African child. I'm really grateful, Madame Grassa Machel, for all that you have done, and therefore on behalf of the staff of the African Child Policy Forum, I'd like to express in front of this audience our enormous gratitude and appreciation for your guidance and leadership. This conference is the work of many, many individuals, definitely the staff of ACPF. Though it's not the normal practice, duty dictates that I should really express my appreciation and thanks to my colleagues and staff within the African Child Policy Forum, and I think they deserve an applause, really. From outside ACPF, this conference was really organized successfully, thanks to the generosity of very many partners from outside Africa. Some of them would prefer to remain anonymous, and therefore I wouldn't mention them. But I'd like to thank UNFPA. The executive director, Dr. Natalia Canham, was expected to be here, but she had to fly out in the middle of the night because of an important engagement in Oslo concerning some humanitarian activity. But I'd like to thank UNFPA as well as the support of Plan International and Children's Fund of Canada for their support. At the end of the day, the quality of a conference is dictated by the quality of the participants and the quality of the deliberations of the conference. We look forward to your deliberations and to your conclusions. I do look forward to the call for action which is expected to come out of this conference. And in the meantime, I wish you a very successful conference. And thank you very much for being with us here.